Previously to 94.
All right. So let's start looking at LO5. So strategic planning follows a certain process if it's done correctly. So at the beginning, we talked about things like goal setting. This is where you look at developing your vision, your mission statement, your vision statement, your core values, corporate objectives, things like that. We talked about that at a previous session. We then go into analyzing the environment. You analyze your external environment using your PESO analysis, for instance. You analyze your competitive environment using your Porter's 5 forces model. Covered all of this in previous session. You can analyze your internal environment using SWOT analysis or resource-based view, VRIO model, or Porter's value chain. There are so many things you can use, even cultural analysis model. Then you have to choose between your different strategic options. I'll discuss this in previous sessions. You can focus on cost or quality or innovation or niche markets, so on and so forth. At corporate level, at business level, different strategic objectives. And then you now need to go into implementation. So at the last session, we covered change management, which is a key skill in implementation. And today we'll be looking more at risk, managing the risk, and implementing the plan, and things like that. So, and measuring performance. So monitoring and controlling performance. How do we monitor performance? How do we know we are succeeding in terms of performance? So this model is good to start thinking about what are your performance objectives, and part of that is the time to achieve these performance objectives. So this is modeled by Lynch and Cross. So at level 1, you start by looking at your corporate vision, mission statement, things like that. Ensure that you have it and that it's fit for purpose, right? That is appropriate to your organization. Then at level 2, that's level 1 is your corporate level strategy. Level 2 is your business level strategy. So we talk about strategic business units. So we covered this in a previous session. If you are a conglomerate, big organization, you may have a strategic business unit that makes luxury cars. You may have another one that makes tractors and farming equipment. And you treat them as two separate profit centers, and if one is doing very badly, you may decide to sell off. The strategic business is almost like an independent entity within the organization. If it's doing very well, you may decide to expand. So at that level, you are looking at a different type of strategic options. You're looking at also measuring your performance in terms of your market share, market growth. So we talked about the BCG matrix. You can use for that. Your financial performance, obviously, how much profit you're making and things like that, return on investment. Those are the ways to measure performance there. At level 3, this is actually the functional level or operating level. You measure performance in terms of things like your customer satisfaction, your flexibility or ability to change as an organization, how quickly you can respond to environmental changes, productivity, how productive are you. So if you have 100 employees and you're making 1,000 cars a year, another similar factory, 100 employees, but they're able to make 1,500 cars a year, then they're more productive. So things like that. Then at level 4, your departmental or functional level, you look at the quality produced in terms of products or services, your delivery time. Did you meet your delivery time, delivery target, cycle time, that's production time, or time to do a certain process? How much waste have you eliminated or do you produce? So how efficient are you? So all of this measures your internal effectiveness or internal efficiency or external efficiency, tending more to the left or the right of the model. So these are just different ways of performance measures that you need to incorporate into your plan. So when you draw up a strategic plan, you have a section usually towards the end where you say these are the measures of success or performance measures or KPIs, key performance indicators or CSF. critical success factors. And for each of these, you will set your targets usually, right? So for quality, you like to produce 98% quality, only 2% defect. That can be a quality standard, right? Your cycle time, we expect to produce one car, let's say a car manufacturing company, in 26 hours. That's your cycle time for end to end, something like that. So you need to have performance measures, and we use this to control or to manage the strategy implementation or the production process. So this leads us to the idea of control. So these are some common performance measures or KPIs, key performance indicators, for some of the things we've talked about. This is the balance scorecard. Some of you may see it more as a diagram. Let me see if I can open a diagram of a balance scorecard, just so you see it in the diagram form. So this balance scorecard is by Kaplan and Norton. So if you are using this in your assignment, you have to reference it, Kaplan and Norton. Something like this. For an easier one. That's this one. So this is what your balance scorecard looks like. So in the past, organizations used to focus mostly on only financial and productivity targets, right? So mostly financial targets, and that's all their performance measures. But we found that as companies progressed with time in the modern era, that is not sufficient, because you can make a lot of profits and then still lose out to your competitors, or be have a bad reputation with your customers or with the society if you don't look at the other measures of success. So Kaplan and Norton came up with what they call a balanced scorecard. What they're saying is, for your competitive advantage, you need to look beyond financial perspective to 4 perspectives. So you have your financial perspective, obviously you need to make a profit, and there are different terms your accountants will use, like return on investment, return on capital, and so on and so forth, cash flow, all of that. But basically different forms of financial measures. Then we also need to look at your learning and growth. So look at your employees, your HR especially, and find out, do they have the right skills? You need to measure their skill set, right? That will give you a form of performance measures that have been overlooked in the past. There's your skill set of your employees, knowledge, skills, competencies, knowledge management, ability to share knowledge and information among each other, and your turnover, employee engagement, things like that, employee satisfaction and retention. So basically a lot of HR measures are now included. Your customers also, you need to look at externally, your customer satisfaction index, customer loyalty, and so on and so forth. And then your internal business processes. So this have to do more with your efficiency and productivity measures and quality. So what's your cycle time to produce your good or service? What's the level of quality or level of percentage of defects each time, and so on. So we call this the balanced scorecard, and it gives a more balanced measurement of perspective rather than just measuring financial perspective. Say, oh yes, we made a profit or loss, because you find companies that this year they can make a profit, but next year they lose out because they started losing customers, or they started losing key employees and key skills. So from a strategic perspective, we tend to balance the whole performance, not just financial. We look at all these other aspects, right? So for your critical success factors for customers, you can look at, do your customers prefer a low-cost product, or do they prefer a high-quality product? What is important to the customers you are serving, or your niche market of customers? And then in terms of your KPIs, your key performance indicators, you can benchmark your cost of your product or service versus your key rival or key competitors' cost, right? In terms of quality, you can look at percentage of defects each time you produce, and so on. So like that, for each of the four perspectives, you can look at your critical success factors and key performance indicators. So, any questions so far? Please just ask me, stop me if you've got a question. Also at the end, we take questions. But if anything is not clear, it's better to also just stop me sometimes. So, we've looked at the key aspects of monitoring and controlling your strategy implementation or strategic plan implementation through performance measures, right? Another thing you can do with your implementing your strategic plan or strategy is to manage the risk inherent within your organization or the strategy you are pursuing, right? So I'm not going to go through all the slides. If not, we will not have enough time, but I'll just highlight the key things you want to consider. So there's some key terms here, but I think let's focus on this one. So these are some types of risk you may encounter, right? Economic and non-economic risks, pure and speculative risks, controllable and uncontrollable risks, insurable and uninsurable risks, for instance. So economic risks are risks so risk is the possibility of loss, right? Risk is the possibility of loss. Insurance is to protect you from the probability of that loss, right? So economic risks are where your loss is directly measurable in money, in economic terms. So for instance, if you are operating a business, you can run the risk of a natural disaster or flood or earthquake or whatever, your factory is destroyed. You can measure how much your assets are cost and how much you've lost. Right? That's an economic risk. So anything that is easily measured in monetary terms, directly measured in monetary terms. So normally the risk, economic risk, is the risk, for instance, for an asset, because we know the value of the asset on your balance sheet at each point in time. So your car, your equipment, and so on and so forth. Non-economic risk is risk that affects you but is not directly monetized. So for instance, risk to your reputation as an organization, risk to your brand. It's difficult to put a quantitative monetary figure on it, right? So for instance, if you are an oil drilling company, let's say British Petroleum, BP or Shell or whatever, and you have an oil spill, and that oil spill wrecks some of your oil rigs and oil tankers, oil ships in the ocean. Those are economic risks. We know how much the value of that oil rig is. We know how much the value of the ship is. Even your employees, you have monetized, how much each person is worth in terms of life insurance and so on. But it may also affect your reputation. Come you say, society will say you are polluting the environment. You are not a good corporation, no ethics, no corporate social responsibility. To damage your reputation, but we cannot quantify easily in dollars, pounds, or whatever how much that risk to your reputation is. So that's a non-economic risk. And for the non-economic risk, insurers tend to avoid insurance, right? But as a manager, you have to protect. So when you're making decisions, you are not only making decisions to protect your economic assets, you should also be making decisions in your strategy to protect your non-economic assets, right? So then the other one is pure and speculative risk. So these are a pure risk is where there's only a chance of loss. If the event occurs, the hazard occurs, a you will only suffer a loss, right? Whereas a speculative risk means when something occurs, it may go two ways. It may either give you a loss or give you a gain, a profit. So, for instance, if you have a car as a company and that car is involved in an accident or someone steals it, theft, you suffer the loss. There's no possibility of gain from that hazard occurs. That is a pure risk. A speculative risk is if, as a company, you decide to invest some of your money on the stock market. By the end of the year, it may have gone two ways. It may have gone and you have made a loss, or it may have even increased and you may have made a profit. Speculative risk. So again, insurers will only protect you against normally a pure risk where you suffer loss. They will not normally protect you against a speculative risk where there's a possibility you make a gain from events occurring. So again, in your strategic plan, you need to identify what are your pure risks, try to get some insurance cover or whatever what you can do for them. But also note that there will be some speculative risks involved in what they may result in a loss or a gain, and then you have to take a decision on whether the reward, the potential reward, is worth the possible risk. Right? So sometimes you say, look, the reward, if all this goes well, we're only going to make $1 million, but is it worth the risk to our company, to our reputation, blah blah blah. But sometimes you may look at, oh, we're going to make $10 million. That's a big reward. It's worth this risk. So, as a CEO and senior executive team, you have to take those kind of decisions in terms of your strategy. Controllable and uncontrollable risks. Here we are referring to things that are within your control to prevent or protect. Those are controllable risks. Uncontrollable risks, something totally out of your control, like a natural disaster, flooding, earthquake, hurricane. Uncontrollable risks, right? But controllable risks are things within your control. So, for instance, the working environment, safe working environment of your employees, it depends on your health and safety process and procedures. And then, insurable and uninsurable risks. Simply put, these are the risks that an insurance company will be willing to protect you against if you pay a premium, if you buy insurance policy cover from them. Uninsurable risks, these are risks that the insurance company are not willing to cover to protect you from, right? Usually because the possibility of their happening are too high. If the possibility is too high, it's not worth the insurance company because they themselves are trying to make a profit. So what they do is they pool many policyholders together, that people buy insurance, and they say, okay, if we get 1,000 of these people and they're all insuring against something that is unlikely to happen, oh, they are goods being lost in transit. We know only one or two at the end of the year will suffer goods lost in transit, damage or accident. So it's worth it if we pay out to one or two people for that, but we are getting monthly premiums from 1,000 people, we'll make a profit. Right? So that's an insurable risk to them. But where the possibility of the risk happening is very high, where you say out of the 1,000 people paying monthly, we are looking at 800 or 900 possibly making a claim because the risk of that thing happening is very high. For instance, if companies ask you to insure against late transportation, like flights or trains or flights being late, more than 10 minutes late in terms of their business operations. We know that the train transport companies are usually late. No insurance company will insure against that. So those are uninsurable risks. So those are the types of risks. Now we look at how to manage or how to deal with the risk. So 4 main ways: we avoid the risk, we transfer the risk, we can insure the risk, we can assume the risk. So in terms of avoid the risk, you can choose not to complete the risky activity. So as a strategic manager, when you analyze your strategy and then you identify what the specific risks are, you can decide this strategy is too risky. not worth it. Let's pick another strategy. Another way of managing risk is to transfer the risk. So you can find another business to complete the activity or someone else to get the risk. So in this case, we say we want to do this business, but we are not willing to get the risk. So for instance, that risky aspect, why don't we outsource it? Right? And then we only have a contractual relationship with the outsource company. The outsource company, they won't bear any risk. So for instance, if you want to sell your products in Iraq, let's say that's a war-ravaged country, a serious threat of violence. But you feel that you have a good market there to sell your products. There are two ways of doing it. You can go and set up a branch in Iraq, in which case you are bearing the risk. Any employee that is killed, that is kidnapped, that is injured, you have to pay out for that. Right? Another way of doing it, you can get a local Iraqi company and say, we're outsourcing to you. You will be the one to do our marketing, our sales, our operations. We're not going to. So every staff is your employee, is your responsibility. We'll pay you this contractual figure for you to sell our products for us. So what you've done is you've transferred the risk to another company which is more willing to bear that risk or more capable of bearing the risk. A third strategy to manage risk is to insure the risk. So we talked about it. So in some instances you can insure the risk. In which case, when it happens, you can now just claim insurance to cover. And then a fourth strategy is to assume the risk. So say, look, we've looked at this risk. We are not going to avoid it. We are not going to transfer. We are not going to. We are going to assume this. We are going to bear full responsibility. We don't think it will happen, but if it does happen, then it's on our shoulders. We'll bear this risk. So those are some very broad ways of looking at risk management as part of your strategy approach. So we've covered most of all these things. We know. So the subsequent slides are going to skip them. I think for risk management, I think I've spent enough time identifying the key things. Just this last slide, I think we do. So insurer. So that's your insurance company. Insured is you who is buying the insurance, or insured is the person or property that is being insured, right? So for instance, your staff may be insured, you insure the life of your staff or your car, company car, whatever. Policy holder is you who has bought the insurance, you bought the insurance policy, so you are the policy holder. Premium is usually your monthly payment to the insurance company, and in exchange for that monthly payment, if the hazard actually occurs, then the insurance will pay, but you have to make a claim for them to pay. That's the way insurance works. So the rest of the slides, I think you can read up on your own. They're not really that key, and some of them we have we've discussed already what insurable and uninsurable risk is. We've discussed economic risk and so on, right? Managing risk, some other things to do with managing risks that are important. This is also important. Another issue with risk is your copyright and patent. So especially where a company that is quite innovative and you come up with a new idea, one way of protecting yourself, protecting that idea, is to to register it as a copyright or patent, right, in the relevant countries to protect you at least for some number of years, so no one can easily steal your idea. However, we know that that doesn't always work in practice. Some countries may not register you, or where they register you, there's weak implementation, weak enforcement of your copyright laws, and a lot of them just allow people in their countries to steal your ideas. So it's a risk to bear in mind. In terms of your strategy, what are the type of risks that you actually identify, right? So economic conditions may change. You have developed a strategy based on consumers buying luxury cars, but if there's an economic recession, consumers may delay, suspend buying luxury cars until the economy improves. So those kind of things economic conditions. Sometimes it may favor you. For instance, if there's a recession, they may not buy luxury cars, but they may spend more money buying food or basic, cheaper type of cars. So if you are selling those type of products, then that economic condition favors you. Consumer demand is a risk. Consumer taste may change. Consumer demand may change. Your competitors, you have to monitor what your competitors are doing and their actions. And this is where also copyright may come in place. Have they developed something that is protected by copyright, or can you copy? Technological changes are risks for you. May make your business, product, service, or business model outdated very quickly, very fast. If there's a new technology that your competitors are using to replace you. Local conditions and local factors in your business environment, operating environment, safety concerns, and things like that. Your business operations will have risks. So those are some risks, some things to do in terms of managing risk. So you need to inform your employees and so on about the risk and what to do with a risk register, risk log, risk management procedures. Implement measures to gather information and spot possible problems. So try to anticipate the risks and ask across your organization for some sort of risk analysis to be conducted regularly. Inspect your facilities and equipment, especially for health and safety, and that people are following proper procedure, wearing their helmets, wearing their hand gloves, following proper procedure. If not, if they are slack on that, it may cause industrial accidents. If you're active in local communities, it may help prevent risks from, especially reputational damage, risk from this kind of things. Build relationships with government officials, try to understand, where the regulation is heading and what they want from you. So we've talked about property rights, patents, copyright. We've talked about reducing risks. Yeah. Okay. Like that. So the first part of the class, we looked at performance measures and KPIs, looked at balance scorecard in particular. The second part of the class, we looked at risk management for your strategy. Now we are going to look at other forms of control processes. Right? So control is not just risk, we control or performance. We also just control the actual process, the organizational process or production process. So this is a very useful model by Johnson, Whittington and Scholes. Again, that's your reference if you are citing it. In your business operations, you can think of control as going against two dimensions. Control can be either focused on input or output. So I will just annotate that here so you see. Control can be based on input or output, or it can be direct or indirect. Input means something that is going in before your final product or service. Your output is when you are looking at the final product or service. Direct is where you have much more direct supervisory control, managerial control. Indirect is where it's not a human being that is giving the direct control, but you set up a framework, a broad framework that or policy that can control. So I'll explain. The simplest form of control is a direct form of control focused on inputs. So we'll call that direct supervision. This is one everybody kind of understands or knows this or has experienced this. This is where your manager or supervisor controls the employees within their team or department. So they monitor them. They say, oh, this thing you're doing is good, or every week or every month they have an appraisal meeting, or every day they are physically monitoring what you're doing, and they can control and correct. Say, oh, you are not coming to work on time, you are leaving early, this product is not good enough, this report you wrote is not good enough, make these changes, you are not following health and safety procedures, go back, wear your helmet, or redo this. That's direct supervision. So your manager or supervisor is making a direct form of control on an input on what the employee is doing, not on the final product or service. Another form of control is what we call performance targeting. This is where the manager or supervisor, that is direct control is coming from a manager supervisor. But now, instead of focusing on input from the employee or raw materials, right? So a manager can also make direct control based on raw materials. He can look at the quality or quantity of the raw materials. That's a form of direct control, direct supervision. But when you're looking at output, here what you're doing is you're setting performance targets. You're saying we are not necessarily looking at the input. What we just want, whatever you do, just make sure that your final product or final service, you make so many of them within this period of time to this level of quality, right? So we expect you to produce a report in 1 month's time that addresses these 6 issues. That's performance target. We expect you to improve sales by 10%. That's performance target. You are looking at the output of the product or service, but it's a direct form of control. So very commonly used in organizations. Very common again in strategy. You set a lot of targets. Indirect forms of control. So this is where instead of a manager, supervisor as a person delivering this control, or leader delivering this control, what the leader does in this case is set a broad framework, a general framework or policy guideline, right? Or situation or circumstance that will act as a form of control. So for instance, we have indirect control focused on inputs. We call this cultural processes, or think of it like organizational culture. Because you say that as an organization, this is the way we behave, this is the way we behave, we don't do this, we don't sexually harass, we don't bully, we don't have there's no room for sexual harassment or bullying in an organization. We always strive to make higher product qualities, and the customer is always right. So let's say those are your 3 things as your organizational culture. Customer is always right, customer is clean, high quality products, Russian always, no bullying or harassment. What you've done is you've set up a framework of behavior through your organizational culture that anytime the employee is doing it, they themselves will be controlling themselves, policing, self-policing, self-discipline. They'll be thinking about it themselves. Also, their colleagues will be monitoring them. So you don't need a manager to monitor them, because their teammates will be saying, this thing you're doing is right, or this thing you're doing is wrong. Right? The policy guidelines will be monitoring them. You don't need a human being or a CCTV camera to be monitoring directly. So that's a form of indirect control focused on input, cultural process. When you look at indirect control, so rather than a manager, supervisor, or leader, a broader framework being the tool of control, focusing on output, that is the actual product or service that is delivered. Here we look at what we call internal market. So what you can do is you can use demand and supply to act as a form of control. The market is demand and supply, right? So let's say you now say any department that is producing a good or service needs to purchase their raw materials from this list of suppliers, or from a fellow department that is part of the process. So if you are making a car, you need to buy your steel from the steel company, and are both owned by the same parent company. The steel company that produces steel, and then the car company that turns out to lead to car. So what you are doing there is a form of control based on market, internal demand and supply. If the people supplying, their price is too high, the internal people will complain and say we need to go externally, we need to look for someone else. Or if the people buying are not making enough profit, then they will not be able to pay for the set price at which the seller is selling. So again, that's a form of control, to force them to be profitable, to make enough money to buy this goods or service at this price, right? So you see this a lot in organizations where in their accounting system they use what they call cost centers and this and that. So anytime an employee is doing this, let's say an employee is going on training or employees, they allocate it to your cost center. You have to keep it in budget and they fix the price. So it's up to you to manage your resources to ensure that you can either buy or sell at that price. Right? So either you need to make enough profit or make sure your employees adding value to qualify to buy this training or service on behalf of your employees. So those are your 4 types of control processes. Planning processes, yeah, this is part of direct control based on input. So that direct supervision, and then your managers also plan. So that's setting up a plan and then you must follow this plan. It's part of direct supervision based on input. So those are different ways you can use control. So this one just talks about relationships. You have internal relationships and external relationships where you share knowledge and support each other. And again, this can be forms of things that support the implementation of your strategy and control through relationships. So we'll look at that through another module very soon. But in terms of your internal relationships, different levels of control. So at one end you have very centralized, at the other end you have very decentralized approach. So this is very centralized at this end, and at this end you have a very decentralized approach. So where the senior management sets the strategic plan, are responsible for implementing it and controlling it, are responsible for financial spend. Every penny that is spent or much of it they have to approve. That is tending more towards tight control, centralized. Or where they allow more of these things to be done by people lower down in the organization, teams or departments and so on, then it's tending towards decentralized approach. Or where they have branches, each branch can take those decisions around. Usually, first of all, they give them the power to take decisions over financial control without much approval, and then strategy implementation. So those are 2 extremes, and people fall across the spectrum. So those are, if you like, levels of control from centralized to decentralized. So we've talked about outsourcing already, and so this is in terms of your external relationships, how to support your strategy. Say that this can be used to mitigate risk, this can be used to support your strategy and mitigate risk. So outsourcing, we talked about that. Strategic alliance is here. Different companies, 2 or more different companies can decide, look, we remain separate, but we can cooperate on certain things. For instance, on product development. An aircraft company and a car manufacturing company, they are different industries, so they are not direct competitors, but they can cooperate in developing the next type of green engine, the engine that uses biofuel or green fuel that doesn't pollute. So that when they develop it together, they save costs, bring ideas together, it's better. Then you can use it for your aeroplane, I can use it for my car. That's an example of a strategic alliance. And then some organizations are what we call virtual organizations. So like on Amazon and platforms where they basically cooperate to operate on the same platform, for instance, to sell goods or services. So this one, I think we can talk about it very quickly, but these are just in terms of your company strategy. These are things you will need to balance, and each company will balance them differently. So we've already talked about centralizing or decentralizing, and each company will, based on their situation, will tend more towards centralizing or decentralizing or somewhere along the spectrum, and it will be different from each company. So the same thing with hierarchy or networks. Some companies will want a very bureaucratic hierarchical organization because they need that type of control. Others want a freer organization with more knowledge exchange networks and intermingling matrix type of structures within the organization for less hierarchy, less bureaucratic control. So it's 2 extremes, and you have to find the balance. or some organizations want a very tight or loose approach to their cooperation among their different entities, their SBUs, their branches. So how much must they, how uniform or standardized must they be, how tightly coupled must they be, or can we be all part of the same organization, but what you do in Europe is very different from what you do in America, very different from what you do in Asia. That's the same company. Holistic solutions of best practices. So some organizations tend more towards doing best practice that are generic across everybody, across the industry. Others want something tailored specifically to our organization. So that's more a holistic solution. And then vertical, horizontal, vertical accountability, horizontal integration is just very similar to hierarchy and networks. The more you want clear reporting lines and clear accountability at different levels of the hierarchy, tend towards vertical accountability. The more you want people, rather than reporting in that straight line vertically, but to work together and share knowledge, you're moving more towards horizontal integration. So again, just some things to bear in mind when you're setting up the structure of your organization. This has to do with mostly structure and configuration issues. So this one we won't go into. We'll cover this, I think, either in the first or second session, but we'll basically mention that there are different types of competencies and so this is your capabilities, where you have different types of resources and competencies: physical, financial, human, and intellectual resources. The same with competencies. Competence being how you use them, resources being what you actually have. So your physical resource, like your car, your equipment, your physical competence, your ability to utilize those cars and equipment very productively. Those are things that will determine your resourcing strategy. But basically, when you come up with your company strategy, you need to have a section based on what we call resources or resourcing strategy. So this section of your overall strategy says, this is our strategy. This is the company want to compete on in this market, quality or innovation or product, whatever it is. Want to enter new markets, want to go internationally, whatever your strategy is. And then there's a section, like you said, on performance management, performance targets control. There's also a section on resources. These are the resources we need to accomplish this within the time. So you need to think about financial resources almost like a budget. To achieve this strategy, we need to spend $1 million. But we expect to get $10 million at the end of 3 years as return. Physical resources, we need this number of new factories or new equipment or new technology to deliver the strategy. Human resources, we need this number of employees with this type of skill set. So, so you need a section for resourcing your strategy. So in terms of innovation, some people focus on innovation as their main strategy, and here we talk about just some key things. We won't cover everything here, but some key things is you have to strike a balance between innovation and current production. So innovation is your future ideas, the new things you are doing, but your current efficient production you cannot ignore. Anticipate innovation, so your ability to scan your environment and your competitors to know what the next trend is to be ahead of the game. And the key question being, should you be a first mover or follower? So sometimes it pays to be a first mover, to be the person who researches, develops, and come up with a new innovation, and then all your customers come to you. Other times it may pay to be a follower, where you wait for somebody else to spend all the money and take the risk of invention. 10 of them will fail, 11th one is successful, they spend a lot of money before they got the successful product, and then you simply copy. So there's another strategy for managing risk in innovation. So we've talked about this already in this session and also in previous sessions, but just the way that your structure, your relationships, your processes have to support your organization. So your strategy is linked to your organizational structure, tall or flat, hierarchical, functional structure, geographical structure. We've covered all of that in previous classes. Talked about relationships, internal and external relationships, here also outsourcing, strategic alliances. Talked about the efficiency of your processes and so on. So all of these have to support your strategy. This one will skip this, just will cover this in terms of resistance to change, but there are different employees where you are implementing your strategy, which is usually a new thing, a change. People may range from outright opposition and resistance down to commitment and acceptance, right? But we covered it in a better way last time when we talked about change management and change resistance to change. So look at that. Some of the type of risks you may face also are political behavior. So internal politics within the organization can be a risk. People protecting their department, protecting their budget, protecting their empire, that kind of thing. These are just examples of the kind of risks you may face when you're trying to implement a strategy or implement a change in the organization. So you can read up these ones by yourself. Another risk has to do with culture change. If you are drastically changing the culture, there's a risk because people are used to the old culture and you find resistance. Another risk is your skills gap. So if you have a very ambitious strategy that requires new technology, new processes, new innovation, but your employees don't have the skills for it, then there's a risk, skills gap, which you now need to fill in your resourcing strategy. You need to now itemize the skills that are needed, the employees that are needed, whether you're going to train them or whether you're going to recruit them. So based on your risk section, you can have a section with resourcing strategies that will mitigate these risks. So we're not going to look at this, but we've mentioned already the balance scorecard. We talked about financial performance targets and other performance targets, learning and development, customer satisfaction. So these are just examples of some financial and some non-financial performance targets that you may want to focus on as part of your product, as part of your strategy. So these are just examples. You can read this on this planning process. There is a marketing as an example, but I'd like you to think bigger, your overall common strategy, right? How to write it. So sections of your strategy can start with an executive summary, internal and external analysis, and then different resource allocation, different strategic options, and then strategic chosen, control and evaluation risks. So those are the kind of things you can put. And this slide just helps you, remind you of the strategic process and what you need to do to review and control it, from analysis to the choice to your strategy implementation. So we've covered all of this in different sessions, but just to recap, strategic management process. This again is just examples of your KPIs and physical success factors. But we've covered this already in the class. Some of these are quite repetitive. This is a good slide actually, in terms of choosing your corporate strategy or business strategy. You have to use 3 criteria advised by Johnson Business International Schools. So again, that's a reference. In terms of choosing your strategy as a business, you need to choose strategies. When you look at your different options, do we go for low price, low cost? Do we go for high quality? Do we go for innovation? Do we go for international expansion? Whatever your strategy is, you need to develop. You need to choose based on it being suitable for your organization, so it's appropriate for your organization. Also, what works for Google may not work for Apple. It's suitable for your company. The second criteria you need to choose based on is acceptability. It may be suitable for your company, but your key stakeholders will not accept it. Either your shareholders will not like the idea, your employees may not like the idea, your customers may not like the idea, or the government regulators may not like the idea, or even the local society may say, oh, this is not environmentally friendly or whatever, right? So you have to also look at how acceptable is your strategy. So if your strategy is low cost and you decide that low cost is true, for instance, cutting down on certain equipment, certain infrastructure, it may be suitable, but it may not be acceptable because government regulators or society may say, well, you've cut down so much that there's now health and safety risks. I'm not sure if this product is safe anymore. So you have to look at the acceptability. Then you have to look at the feasibility. Feasibility simply means Is it practical? Do you have the resources to deliver this on time? So when you outline your various strategic options, you're not choosing based on these three criteria. A strategy that is suitable to your organization, what works for Google will not work for Apple, that is acceptable to your stakeholders, that will not dent your reputation or lose you goodwill among your customers or other stakeholders, and it's feasible. You have the resources to execute it. It's very important, and I think that's it. This is just more examples of financial planning. So we've covered quite a lot. I want to also very quickly cover something that we didn't cover last time. This. So when we looked at the change management models last time, we looked at Lewin's three-phase model, unfreeze, change, refreeze. We looked at Cotter's 8-step model of change, starting with creating a bonding platform all down to embedding the change. Another popular tool of change management that we didn't look at last week, somehow it wasn't in the slides, I noticed, is the McKinsey 7S framework. It's very good for change management. It's also very good for strategy development. What this McKinsey, developed by McKinsey Consulting, one of the most popular consulting, famous consulting management consulting company in the world, is that your strategy should make sense. 7 aspects of them must support each other. So your structure must support your strategy, your internal systems must support your strategy and your structure, your shared values, that's your ethical guidelines and core values, must support the skills within your organization, must support your staff, your employees, and your style. Style means basically organizational culture. So when all of these are moving in the same direction, you have higher chance of succeeding with your strategy or with your change. If there's a problem in the organization or with your strategy, it usually is because one of these things is out of sync, out of line. All the others are going in the same direction, supporting each other, but one of them is deviating. So the 7 S is your strategy, your structure, your systems, your shared values, your skills, your staff, your style, organizational culture must all be aligned to each other, right? And the harder ones are on the top, the bottom ones, the softer ones are the bottom. So harder ones are the ones that are more easily changeable. You can control them more easily. Your strategy can identify what it is. You can change your structure, your system. It's very easy to see. The softer ones are not so easy to see or not so clear or apparent and a bit more difficult sometimes to change. Your organizational culture, it's a bit softer in that it's not as clear on the surface what it is. Your staff, what they're thinking in their mind, their level of engagement, so on, you need to dig to find that out, and their skills and competencies. Shared value is somewhere in between. So it's a very useful change management model. By that we mean that when you're looking at change, you're looking at what aspects of this need to change to support this new strategy. So if you are changing one aspect, how does it affect the other aspects also? Those are the kind of things we use it for in change management. Right? But it helps us identify what we need to change. Right? So very quickly, that's the McKinsey 7S framework. So any questions from what we covered today? I know that's been quite a lot, but any questions? Any questions what we covered today?
Hello, I think everything is clear. I'll read the slides personally, and can I ask anything in the next section? Regarding this?
Yes. So let's take a 5-minute break. Come back in next section. If you have questions on this or any other previous session, free to ask. We also look at some of the coursework support and the coursework tasks.
Sure.
Okay. So let's take a break.
Okay. Okay.